And good afternoon, and welcome to this special edition of the People Show with yours truly, Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator. On this bright and sunny Thursday afternoon, we're going to be talking about the upcoming election. And in this video, we're going to be talking about two very important elections, and that is the Cook County Assessor's race and the Board of Review, the first district race. And that is George Cardenas, who is the incumbent at the Board of Review, and Fritz Kagi, who is the Cook County Assessor's Office, and who's going to be joining me to have that conversation in just a few minutes is going to be the former Cook County Clerk and former Alderman of the City of Chicago and former Mayor for a couple of days of the City of Chicago, none other than my friend David Orr is going to be joining us for that conversation. We're going to try to provide you some very simplistic information related to the Cook County Assessor's Office and why Fritz Kagi is the better choice for that office since he's been there, and we should send him back there a third time. Of course, my organization, 10 by 10 to Win, endorsed Fritz Kagi for re-election, and we are certainly proud to have done that. So I want to give you a little background. In 2024, the reassessment of Chicago by the office overall assessed values that grew about 22% to $50.5 billion. Residential assessed values rose by 18% to $24.8 billion, while commercial assessment values rose by 27% to $25.6 billion. With these changes in value, homeowners' share of Chicago's total tax base would have declined from 51% to 49%. These changes reflected on the granular data-driven observations of both the residential and commercial real estate markets. On the residential side, house prices were up to some degree in nearly all of Chicago's community areas. The most affordable homes in Chicago have generally been most in demand, particularly since home builders and developers report it's cost at least $400,000 to profitably create a new housing unit. This rise in demand means that many homeowners in historically disinvested communities on the south and west sides have seen greater gains to their housing wealth than any other period in the last 20 years. We're also seeing a third-party research shows that our assessments of homes have dramatically reduced in previous disparities. A September 2025 report found that fairer assessments have saved the homeowners of low and middle priced homes $1.9 billion. And that's what we are here to talk about with you, to share with you some more information. And here joining me in that discussion is my good friend, David Orr. David, welcome to the program. How you doing?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Good, good. All right, so we are upon ourselves in another election year here in Chicago, and two of the hottest conversations, which typically get couched depending upon who is framing the argument, and certainly we have this difference within the Democratic Party. Basically, here in Chicago, most things are governed by the Democratic Party, but there are some differences in terms of the progressive Democrats and those of the machine politics, which we will get into. Fritz Kagi is a progressive Democrat. He's not endorsed by the machine, and we'll get into why that is. And then, of course, you are a Democrat, I'm a Democrat, but we are more of the progressive Democrats and wanting to fix the Democratic Party to work better than it is working. And so we'll get into that. So what I want to do, David, is to, as best we possibly can, to simplify for the audience and certainly for the voters of why this race, which is a very, very popular race within this election, the assessor as well as the board of review. But right now we're talking about the assessor. But I want to try to frame this very simplistically as much as we possibly can for the people, why Fritz Kagi is the better choice and why the machine does not want for Fritz Kagi to be the assessor, and what that really means for us. Do we want to go back to where we were before, or do we want to go forward in a more fair and progressive manner? So I'll give you the floor. What do you think?
Simply put, a lot of the old machine friends want to go backward. People like you and me want to go forward, along with Fritz Kagi. Again, think of this as we have a system that was developed a great deal and kind of smoothed out and bore through by Madigan and Burke, and allow the old machine. Madigan and Burke both went to jail for things related to property tax assessments, etc. And they had an incredible, important role in shaping all of this. So what we're talking about here is people's property taxes, but it's a little complicated. For example, as county clerk, the county clerk then, and when I was county clerk, basically prepares the tax bills. Okay, you're looking and say, well, the Park District wants so much, the city wants so much, the Water Reclamation Board wants so much, the county hospitals want this. So we've got all that data going in to decide how much we have to come up with. Okay, that information is all sent to the treasurer that mails out the bills. Okay, and meanwhile, the assessor is deciding the most complicated of all, and that is, what is the value of each of the 1.8 million parcels of property in Cook County? And because it's so big, and I'm not sure it still is, but it was the second biggest county in the nation, they do that over 3 years. Okay, these different districts, and they have time to do that. The fundamental thing is about going back or forward is that this reminds me a lot of with Harold Washington. Harold Washington won kind of a surprise election in 1983, and what you might call the old machine did everything possible to wreck him. Okay, we had the famous council wars and many other things. He beat them. He survived that, only unfortunately to pass away in 1987. But he had to face all of that wrath. This is a similar situation in the sense that Kagi came in to a very corrupt assessor's office. All the pundits would pretty much agree with that. Pay to play, far too many deals for the powerful, meaning the homeowners are paying more than they should have, that kind of thing. That was a real mess. Kagi came in and immediately started reforming that. Okay, and we could go into that if we want, but there's lots of reforms that he passed. But one of the key things was he would take no money from the property tax attorneys, which is a key thing because it's kind of like what I think most of the newspapers, at least the ones that editorialize, and most of the critics would say, you can't have this where, let's say you're the assessor or you're on the board of review, that you can't get $1,000 from some tax lawyer in the morning for your campaign and then make a decision that afternoon about whether or not the piece of property they're trying to get changed is really fair or not. That's horrible. Okay, and the Tribune, and both the Tribune and the Daily Herald that both endorse Fritz Kagi made that clear. Yet, Fritz did that. He stopped the pay to play, would take no money from those tax lawyers. He brought a lot of this complicated, much as say, mess in Cook County up to standards across the country, in many ways, in terms of value of property, et cetera. He did away with the special gifts they kind of gave to the mansions and very wealthy homes and all the breaks that they had. And I could go into that, but he put in a new code of ethics, like I say, ended pay to play. The problem was that the old guard, the old machine, even though Burke and Madigan are in jail, plenty others of those want to see the old system the way it was. In fact, even one of the editorials in the Daily Herald that endorsed Fritz Kagi kind of hints they basically hinted that he was there with the Burials Administration working there, and he almost seems to think like that was better than what we have today. So that's the kind of background for where we are. That many times when there's reforms attempted, particularly in Chicago or Cook County, there's a lot of people that don't want them to happen. Okay, so that's what Fritz Kagi is up against. And we'll see. Now, it's a hard-fought election. We're just trying to get people to understand this kind of stuff. That obviously people like you and me and the Tribune and the Daily Herald are the only ones who are endorsing newspapers this time. We don't want us to go back to that. Okay. And yes, it's hard to reform. It took us what? And we had to wait all those years until 1987 to pass the Tenants' Bill of Rights with
Mhm.
Harold Washington's support. Okay, it took a
Right.
long time, but it made a difference in a lot of people's lives. And now Fritz is trying to do those things, and he's done a lot that we already said. But we believe, at least I certainly believe, that he should have another shot at it, because this is tough, and you don't want to reward the old politics, the old machine, by saying, you make these reforms and we'll kick you out of office.
Well, and also you can't. Most people have to understand that nobody is going into public office and to a governing body, certainly a governing body as broad as Cook County is here in Chicago and Cook County office, and are going to, with a magic wand, going to fix decades and decades and decades and layers and layers and layers of problems that include people who are still a part of the process. And so that's not going to happen overnight. You have, as you said, you have this old guard of the machine of the Democratic Party that want for things to stay in place. And you have the reformers that come in that want to see things that are more equitable, that work better for all people. And so you're up against that, right? You're up against that if you're a reformer or if you're a progressive. So this is what Fritz Kagi is dealing with. So let's talk about the assessor. What is the assessor's job? What is the assessor's role?
Okay, well, the main part of the assessor's role is to determine the value of property of 1.8 million parcels. Said before, in other words, that's a lot of parcels. That goes from big hotels downtown to small little people's homes, etc. To determine that, taking into consideration the variables that could be. Like for businesses, you've certainly got times when there's a slow economy, you have vacancy issues. So to take all that into consideration, and because Cook County is so big, like we were saying before, they do it over a 3-year period. So that's the key to it. Let me just tell you quickly, though, again, kind of what we're up against, but officially from the Tribune, so it's not just me or you. This paper published an investigation concluding that the former assessor Berrios disproportionately penalized small property owners while rewarding wealthy ones. In 2022, this is what's going back in its endorsement of Fritz, as long as they kept the donations coming to Berrios' campaign, nepotism and patronage ran rampant, ethics were ignored, and Black and Latino, the population suffered the most under Berrios. So this is, kind of right on what you were saying. So it's, like I say, the clerk prepares the tax bills, looks at all the towns and all the things that the city has, and then the treasurer send out those bills and collects the money. So clearly the most complicated, very complicated what Fritz has to do. It's also complicated what the clerk has to do. The easiest part is the treasurer just sending out the bills and collecting the money.
Okay, so because all of the blame gets put onto Fritz, right? All of the blame gets put onto the assessor, whatever problem that is. Bills going out late, they want to assign that to the assessor. You have Larry Rogers Jr., who
And
is
that
part
wasn't
of
the
the,
assessor's fault. Yeah.
and it's not the assessor's fault, but you would have them to mislead the public to think that that is the assessor's responsibility. So that's why I wanted to break down what it is that the assessors did. And you saw me give a little background earlier about where property values and assessed values have gone, and how disproportionately that you were speaking to is that the same practice that Barrios was practicing by giving breaks to wealthy commercial property owners downtown, and disproportionately uh, penalizing, the average homeowners. Well, that same practice is going on now that you have the Board of Review that is giving huge tax cuts to commercial property owners downtown, and passing that on to homeowners. This year, homeowners paid an average of an additional $700 a year, and in some places they should have been flat were it not for that shift of those taxes. So let's talk about who is it that is actually responsible for determining how much one pays for their property taxes.
Who's responsible for that? Well, the main thing are the various taxing bodies. That's one. Okay, in other words, if you look at your tax bill, you have all sorts of things on there, and it says it, and it says what the increases are. So for example, let's say the city raised your tax bill year to year, let's say from 3%. Let's say the county is 2 to 3%. The Water Reclamation Board, it gets in there quite a bit too. Then you've got libraries, and you've got all the Cook County Health System. Okay. Um, so you have all those indicators for various local governments, and many of them in the suburbs. The city's a little easier to identify, but each of those suburbs has part of that too. So they collect all that. Okay. So they basically decide this is how much money we need to run these government places. Okay. And it's not like Fritz or any other assessor or even the Board of Review gets to decide, oh, well, we don't think that's good. Okay. They have to raise that amount of money. Okay. So it's that large dollar amount, and that's where the assessment part comes in too. And one thing I like to emphasize over and over again is part of the real problem, particularly in the poorer neighborhoods, the working class areas where they're just not seeming to be getting many breaks. You offer your tax bills are much higher for two reasons. Okay. One is if you don't have any commercial property. Okay. Like Skokie, up north, they have lots of shopping centers. Okay. That's a lot of commercial money that goes into help. Okay. Um, West Garfield doesn't have that, for example, doesn't have much of it at all. Um, um, I'm trying to remember. I think I said two things, but that's one key part of it. The other part, of course, is what you've laid out, at least partially already, is that the reason these newspapers are endorsing Fritz and not Heinz is because we've seen the Heinz seems to support the old commercial system. Okay, and that system has hurt homeowners. We got studies that prove that. You've got famous professor Chris Berry from University of Chicago. A lot of different studies have pointed to things like that. Let me just go back to people see this. You mentioned this, but they say see what kind of money we're talking about. Okay, so let's see. Let's not. I don't know if I can. Here's what it is, because I can't memorize all this. Okay, so these are Board of Review now. Remember, you've got the assessor's office and the Board of Review. My position is the Board of Review is the real problem here, okay? That they're, for the political payouts and others, they're doing the following. So the Trump Hotel, for example, they gave it a 39% cut. That's $48 million in value. Now, remember, if you're a homeowner someplace out there and you don't like your tax bill, you got to understand, whenever they give these breaks to the big fellows downtown, et cetera, you lose. Hilton Towers, 33%, $111 million. Well, let's look at a couple of data centers. One on Cermak, 22%, a cut by the Board of Review, $80 million shifted away from what would have been commercial tax. Another data center on Canal, 52% cut, shifting $75 million. And just to throw in one more, a multi-family unit along Michigan Avenue, 32% cut in the valuation and $87 million shifts. Okay, just look at those, 48, 111, 80, 75. That's just a few. Okay, and so that's what you've been saying. That's what the newspaper said. And yet that's the real struggle. So because Fritz has tried to change the Board of Review, okay, Fritz wants to see the Board of Review brought up to more up to date. They don't, their data's not as good. They use different information to determine their valuations, et cetera. So that's why he's their target. And it's embarrassing in some ways to be a Democrat when you see, we understood it back when Harold was here, Burke and Madigan and all their stuff. But all the pretend leaders out there now in the party, this is 2026 and they're still doing it.
Yeah, and here it is. You have, in particularly on the Black community, you have now the city council that's about 40% represented by the Blacks, and most Black community, and most of them represent communities that are underserved and certainly under invested, but they are gatekeepers for this old guard of the Democratic Party. We are the progressive. That means that we want to go forward. We want things to be much more equitable. So, there's two sides of the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party is not an option. I just want for everybody to understand the Republican Party is not an option for us. Why are they not an option? Because there's nothing in the Republican platform that speaks to serving our communities in any way. The Republicans, they are corporatists, and that's basically what they look to. Now they use these talking points to try to score political points, but they don't have any real substance in terms of public policy. But we do have a problem within the Democratic Party, which we need to fix. And there are parts of the Democratic Party that we need to get rid of those old guards who are representing that old system. Here, talking about the Board of Review. The Board of Review cuts create a real instability. And this comes from the Chicago Reassessment Report of 2024. Let me just read a little bit of this, and then you can expound on this, David. The assessor's office does not have the final word on assessments in Cook County. Instead, the Cook County Board of Review, a separate elected body, answers appeals of our values, and the assessor's office is required by law to accept the numbers from the Board of Review. This year, for the fourth straight time, the appeal decisions at the Board of Review substantially changed the composition of the property tax base, causing homeowners to bear a larger share of the property tax burden. The Board of Review cut commercial assessment values by 17%, or $4.3 billion, while it barely changed residential assessed values by cutting them just 1%. After appeals at the Board of Review, overall average assessed values only rose by 11%. This disproportionate cut to commercial assessed values shifted 5% or 5 percentage points of Chicago's property tax burden onto homeowners from owners of commercial property and large apartment buildings. Therein lies a big part of the problem.
Right. In other words, the heart of this is also very political. In other words, you've described this before as a very complicated process. It doesn't have to be as complicated, but it is, because they don't, the more, let's say, conservative or machine kind of Democrats, they don't want people to understand what's going on. Now, when Barrios messed up so badly, had so many scandals, and then Fritz Kagi beat him and began making changes there, a lot more information came out about what's going on. Okay. And we've got all these figures, but well, it's simply put, if you're a homeowner, if you're a renter, if you're a senior, okay, you want to blame somebody for your tax bills. Okay. They, meaning some of the party leadership and the old hacks, they want to get you to go against Kagi. Okay. Kagi's the one trying to fix it. That's why I use the Harold Washington model. Because when Harold was elected in '83, they did everything possible to make sure he didn't get reelected in '87, but he was so good that he did. So what is so bad for the politics, you know, we don't want to let these snakes, okay, this old machine, these people, like I said, these are incredible figures, we say, giving all these breaks to these groups, like Burke was helping do for Trump Tower. We don't want them to get away with it, okay? And there's only one person at the assessor's office that we could count on and do something about it. And there's one person, well, there's actually two different elections for Board of Review. But we've been focusing on more, what is this, a woman, Juanita, that has the backing of most of the progressive community. And George Cardenas, who's old guard, playing all these same games and giving these tax breaks and taking a lot of money from the tax attorneys. She, like Fritz, are not taking money from the tax attorneys. So to make it as simple as possible, there are different offices. But as you said before, if, let's say, Fritz has made a big step forward in making many of the assessments more fair than when Barrios was there, okay, which studies and so forth claim that. Your point is that we still got the Board of Review, okay? And the Board of Review, if they're what you just read, millions and millions of dollars are being shifted from what would be commercial property, some of the examples we gave, shifted onto the backs of homeowners, small homeowners, but also renters, seniors. So it's we don't want it to get lost. That's why I think people like us think it's so important, because we don't want to see the rampant corruption and so forth under Barrios and so forth to come back.
Yeah, well, and here's an example of that corruption at the Board of Review. Talking about George Cardenas. George Cardenas accepted $4,500 from Tim McNerney, Donald Trump's tax lawyer in Chicago, and $9,000 total from lawyers at the same firm. Months after Cardenas took this donation, the Board of Review reduced the assessed value of Trump Tower in Chicago by $48 million, significantly reducing the taxes owed by Donald Trump and the Trump organization. The University of Chicago, a study found that the Board of Review reductions on appeals consistently shifted property tax burdens back to homeowners from businesses, with a $5 billion reduction in commercial values in 2024. This is the kind of corruption and certainly the kind of reform that Fritz Kagi is trying to move us away from. And again, I always like to point to this because I don't think that we even talk about it enough with people, to say, look, we have a Democratic Party. We have progressive Democrats. I consider myself to be a progressive Democrat. Then we have the Democrats of the old guard. That's where we need to fix the problem. And it's like your automobile that you have, where you have some working parts or some parts that are not working so well. You got to replace those parts so that the whole car runs better. And this is the challenge that we're up against. So we certainly have to not allow for people to take out the good working parts and then to replace the good working parts with bad working parts, so that the problem is worse. David?
Hey, I was kind of gone there for a while. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't tell while I was not still on the screen, but yeah,
Okay.
no, that's exactly the problem. Because remember, this is all a big balancing game. Government needs to run efficiently, even though in a lot of places we don't see it as efficient as we want. And taxes are a critical part of that. But if you're going to really run a decent kind of government, a fair government, then those taxes got to be fair. And we have a history of this. Okay, like I say, Burke and Madigan were very essential in kind of creating this whole situation, and kind of milking it and developing it. And that's why we're trying to make people understand that you've got actually two votes here. You've got a vote for assessor, and you've got a vote in the board of review. You only have one vote. There's three different districts, and two are up this time. And that's where many of us think that this Juanita woman, who was a kind of a dynamite activist for many years, would
Yeah,
be
Juanita Irizarry, which we also endorsed at 10 by 10 to win for the first district of the Cook County Board of Review.
right.
Well, look, on the tax bills here, just, coming up here on the tax bills, when we're talking about who makes up the tax bill. Now, I have a copy of my property tax bill that I just paid. And there are 11 different taxing bodies that make up, who have decided on the taxes that are needed for the impounding, and then what my portion of the real estate tax levy is. And that is the Board of Education, which is the largest. The Board of Education makes up about almost 56% of our tax bills. And then you have the City of Chicago, and you have the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and you have the Chicago Park District, and you have the County of Cook, and you have the Chicago Community Colleges District 508 on my bill, and you have the City of Chicago Building and Improvement Fund. Then you have the City of Chicago Library Fund, the County of Cook Health and Hospitals Commission, the County of Cook Public Safety, and then you have the Forest Preserve District of Cook County. All of these people have basically said, I need this much money from you in order to run these different agencies. That is not determined by Fritz Kagi. It is a pact largely by the Board of Review, when Fritz Kagi has set the assessments, and then the board, they don't like Fritz Kagi's assessments, then they go and hire these appeals attorneys, which pay lots of money to the commissioners at the Board of Review, so that when they hear their cases, they will give them what they want. Nobody's paying Larry Rogers Jr. $1 million in his campaign coffers because they think that he's doing just such a wonderful job and they don't need anything from him. That's what we have happening.
Right. And where government is bad versus where government is good is where they know these are not dumb people. It's Madigan or Burke, or we can talk about some that are not in jail. They're not dumb people. But they know that they're obfuscating, they're confusing, they're throwing the blame in the wrong. They know this. And so part of it was, that's why so many of our battles that we had during Harold Washington's time were this kind of thing, blaming the victim sometimes, blaming the person that doesn't deserve the blame. And that's what's going on right now. And if they win, that'll give them all these tools again, just to go back. And so we're trying to win elections. We're also trying to educate people so they understand, if you really want to know exactly what's going on with these taxes, then go to each one of those things you just read. Well, how much did the library raise? How much did they raise? Are they asking for more money than last year? How much more? The city, all those various county agencies. That's a lot of different taxing bodies. And everybody's tax bill has that. So it's part of this thing is educating people. So you can't sometimes make the reforms you want if you don't really know who's the culprit, who's the good
Mhm.
guy so much, or who's the bad guy, and who's the one that needs an investigation, that kind of thing.
Well, I think you really framed it really well so that people could understand, and certainly putting it in context by using Harold Washington, who was a progressive Democrat by all measure, but he was a Democrat. He was not a part of the old machine. In fact, he spoke about the old machine quite a bit and resisted the old machine. When he got
Right.
into office, there were 29 aldermen that were a part of the old guard, and those 29 were along with Ed Verdoliak and Ed Burke, and they opposed everything that he brought forth. If he wanted to use red paper napkins, they voted against it. And I'm just simplifying it just so that people can know
Yeah.
that
It
they
was
opposed
just
him.
about that, right?
Yeah, they opposed him at the demise of their own communities. They would hurt their own communities. I use it, the example of the empty pool syndrome. When they outlawed segregated pools, rather than them letting everybody come into the pools, they said, we're not going to let anybody go in the pool. We'll just pour concrete in them, and we won't let anybody swim in the pool. That's essentially what it's at. So what you have is you have a reformer who is a Democrat, but certainly not a part of the old guard, who wants to make it fair for everybody. And then you have that old guard of the Democrat. Now, here's where my problem is that old guard of the Democratic Party here in Chicago is represented by a lot of Black people who are supporting that old guard. And we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that, and we have to make sure that we understand. And I think, as we're speaking here, David, we're going to have to really start to help people to understand what is the difference between a progressive Democrat and the machine. Everybody understands what the machine is, but I'm not so sure that people understand that there is a difference between the old guard and the progressive. And that may be something that we need to certainly start to help people to understand the difference.
Well, it's also good to remind people, and I like the historical part too, when we have cases like this, people, a lot of them remember Harold Washington. So remember, Harold Washington wanted some very basic reforms. When he's running for office in 1983, the racism perhaps is not as bad as today, but it was pretty bad. The inequities, okay, patronage was much more in play, whatever. And you had Verdoliak Burke, but you also had a guy named Hines, who was the assessor, was a big part of the opposition. So you're right. We're looking to deal with the immediate, people's having to make some tough decisions about this. We're trying to point out that at least only two major newspapers did endorsements. The Sun-Times doesn't endorse anymore like it used to. And both of them, I think, did a pretty good job of explaining the differences and why they think Fritz Kagi deserves to be reelected and keep making these changes. But you're right, there's plenty of politicals, but there's a lot of arm twisting at the Democratic Party. And that's part of it, that they can promise people things. Everybody wants to run for higher office, almost everybody, or they want to be the committeeman too, or they want this. And party leadership can offer those. And lots of deals were being made when this was all taking place. Pretty ugly deals, which is part of the problem. So deals that Harold wouldn't have made and the deals that we wouldn't want to make today.
Yeah. And using another Harold Washington analogy, and you can speak to this as well. I remember that there was a time that Harold Washington said, look, we have to make sure that it is fair for everybody here. And he said that, you know, the Black community is 30% of the population here. The Hispanic community is just about that same. I think at that time it was about 27, 28%. And then we have to make it sure. So if we are going to be letting out contracts and resources, we have to make sure that on paper that that's what it is. So, you know, don't bring it to me if you haven't really made sure that it is fair and expect for me to sign on to it.
Right. And that's good thing about Harold is he built up that reputation of fairness. And here, let's give one further example of that. The fairness is that the Democratic Party, the old machine at the time, you know, in 1980 and 1990, and you know, every 10 years they got to do the census. Okay, the census decides where the wards go. Okay, and they discriminated against blacks, Latinos again in 1980. Went to court. The court said, "This is nuts. You can't do this," and so they held a special election in 1985, I believe. Okay, and if you remember that special election, I think Harold's people won 4 out of 7, including as we brought in Luis Gutierrez, Chuy Garcia, and others. Okay, and so all of a sudden, the 29-21, the city council, 29 opposed to Harold, 21 working with him. That became 25-25. Okay, back in late 85 or early 86. Therefore, Harold could now break a tie. And that put him on a little bit of a roller coaster in the right direction, and it allowed to him be reelected in 1987. So yeah, sometimes following fairness and making those demands both politically as well as in everyday life and running a city can make a big difference.
All right. Well, listen, that is, we wanted to give you all a basic understanding and framing of the assessor's office. David, if you have some final words, then, you know, I'm going to give them to you, and then we'll wrap this one up, and we want to come back with some more information with them a little bit later.
Well, the final thing is that we're talking a lot about change and those who are against change and all this other little political stuff going on. The bad politics is trying to blame a person that's made good changes to allow a bad system to continue. This is the time when people need to step up and say, no, I'm not gonna be fooled by these people once again. Okay? I mean, Burke and Madigan may be in jail, but there's plenty of others that are still trying to pull out, have this system that's just simply unfair. And we gave people the numbers. Okay? Why should homeowners be paying $700 or more just because of the unfair actions made by the Board of Review? And so they're trying to get rid of Fritz, so hopefully they can do that, the assessor's office, in the same old way. Don't buy it. Don't let them fool you. You know, don't just take our word, but we try to talk about what other groups like the Tribune has said and so forth. So, and thanks for doing this, Mark.
All right, thank you, David. David Orff, retired Cook County Clerk, retired Alderman of the City of Chicago, and you served. Did you serve as mayor for 1 day or 2 days?
7 days.
7 days until
Yeah,
they.
and that there,
until they
and
got
here's old machine stuff too, and I'll leave you with this before we run out. So I knew, because I was Harold's vice mayor at the time, so I knew the law. Okay, most people didn't know the law. Most people thought, well, if you're vice mayor, become mayor till the next election. If you're lieutenant governor, become governor till the next election. But good old Ed Burke had changed that after Old Man Daley died, and there was a fight for control of who was going to be mayor, and a lot of racial tension was in there to deny Wilson Frost, who had the greatest amount of service, maybe to give it to him at that time. Instead, they went with Bolandic. 11th Ward politician. So when the deal then was to say, okay, we'll move ahead on this, but we want to have a vice mayor so everyone knows who's going to take over. Okay. But then Burke got it inserted in there. The vice mayor in a crisis like this becomes mayor, but only until the city council makes a replacement. So I knew that my chances, whatever, I don't have a term now until the next election, which would have been 91. See what I mean? I would have had, what, 2.5, 3 years as mayor. But that's just the way the old machine works to cover its what every time. I never got the mayor's salary either.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, David, thank you so much. That's going to wrap this up for this. Listen, you all, I want you all to, I'm going to re-loop this. You'll be able to go to my page, go to my YouTube page at The People Show, Mark J. Wallace. Look there, subscribe there, and watch these videos. We're going to put out more information so that you all can understand just what this process is and how it actually worked and who is responsible for what. There's a lot of misinformation going on coming out of the Board of Review, largely because the old guard versus the progressive. That is what is happening here. You have a lot of money that is poured into the machine of the Democratic Party, as well as you have a lot of money that is going into certain individuals from the old guard of the Democratic Party. And that's not happening with Fritz Kage. Fritz Kage doesn't take money from appeals attorneys, and so he's not a part of the machine. And they want to take it back to take us back where we were before. That's what in fact, that's what Patrick Hines said, that we want to go back to professionalism, and basically professional stealing is what they want to go back to. So if that's what you want, then that's, if you get Tom or Patrick Haynes, that's what we're going to get. And all of the great work that has been put into place by Fritz Kage reforming the system up to this point is going to be for naught. And we don't need to let that happen again, like we allowed for Richard Daley to come into office and unravel a lot of the great work that Harold Washington put forth, as well as Eugene Sawyer and people like David Orr. All right, so that's going to do it for this special edition of The People Show. I want to thank you all for joining. David and myself will be back with another episode of what we call election education on what's happening between the reformers, the progressives, and the old guard. That's going to be it for this edition of The People Show. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Mark.